Hello, my name is Jordan Lai, and I am a student at Monmouth University, interviewing Linda Bricker, president of the Monmouth County Historical Association, to supplement the exhibit Monmouth County 9/11 and its Aftermath. Today is December 1st, 2021. This interview is being recorded with the permission of all participants. Linda, could you just confirm that you do in fact permit this recording and that you understand that this interview will live on the public domain?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much for taking the time to sit down and talk with me today. Let's begin. Can you tell me briefly about your early life, where and when you were born?
Yes, I was born actually in Highland Park, Illinois in 1954. That is a northern suburb of Chicago. My family hails from the Chicago area, from Illinois. Both my father's side of the family as well as my mother's. So we are Midwesterners at heart, and my father's younger sister was my mother's best friend from elementary school through high school, and they went their separate ways during college. My aunt out to Colorado, my mother to Wells College in New York, and my father had gone to Cornell, and then he went to the Army, and he came back from the Army, and he was sort of hanging around when my mother came home from spring break and went to visit her best friend's parents, and was visiting them when my father came home from a date, and my future grandmother said, "Oh, Ralph, why don't you take Julia home?" And he knew as soon as he got her outside that he was going to ask her out on a date, which he did. And that was the start of him falling in love with my mother. And he pursued her, made up some excuse to have to go back to Cornell, which is where he had gone to school before he went to the Army, and that not far from Wells. And so he went back and stayed in the fraternity so that he could drop in on her at Wells. Long story short, she transferred to Northwestern so she could be closer to him, and he pursued her, engaged. They got engaged. She never finished her senior year. They got married, and my aunt was her maid of honor, of course, because that was her brother married her best friend, and yeah.
That's definitely an interesting dynamic.
Yeah,
that's
it was
for sure.
a really interesting.
Quite the love story.
And I've learned more about my mother, really from my aunt's perspective, which was interesting to see the two of them banter back and forth about their growing up. My aunt was always there to sort of, Julia, that's not how it happened. And the same for my cousin, would hear something from her mother, and my mother would say, Susan, that's not how it happened. Sarah, this is how it happened. So kind of
her side of the story of it.
Yeah, kind of interesting.
And now, if you could kind of jumpstart to when you got involved with the Monmouth County Historical Association.
Well, I have been very active with the Junior League for some, 40 years, and starting out in Chicago. We've lived here for 22 years, and the Junior League is an organization that trains women to be effective volunteer leaders in the community, making things better for women, children, and families, and giving them strong volunteer leadership skills. So I had become very active in the Chicago Junior League and had told many, many people for the 18 years that I was there that it's a great organization to join because there are leagues in 4 different countries, and if you ever move somewhere, you can join your league wherever you go and find like-minded women, never thinking that I would move. We moved to New Jersey, and I got engaged with the Junior League of Monmouth County, and sure enough met like-minded women there. Discovered over the years that one of the projects, many years, and many different kinds of projects were with the Monmouth County Historical Association. So it was in the back of my mind that we had been engaged with this organization. I became president of the league, and when I finished my presidency, I was tapped by the nominating committee of the Historical Association to come on their board. And, really wasn't something I had aspired to do, but the more I thought about it, the more it really fit into many of my interests. I had worked for the Chicago Historical Society doing PR, marketing, and special events, and I've always loved history. And I had been taking care of the Junior League's historic building as one of my volunteer opportunities there. So it really did dovetail with a lot of my interests. And so I came on board and did a number of things with this organization. And after about 6 years, I was tapped to become the president. Also took me by surprise, didn't see that coming, but after getting over my nervousness, decided I would try to rise to the occasion, fill the big shoes of the presidents that had preceded me, and thought that I would bring a great deal of enthusiasm to the position. Perhaps not the deep pockets that others had maybe brought with them, but that I could be hands-on and bring my volunteer skills and do what I could. And I'm still president. This is coming toward the end of my 6th year. I think it's a great organization. I've brought a number of people that I've met through the Junior League onto the board, and that's been nice to bring different skill sets on, but have also come to know so many of the people who've been engaged with this organization over many, many years, and bring with them their institutional knowledge. And so it's been a mix of new ideas, old ideas, and it's truly been so rewarding for me. And I feel like we've done some incredible things. I'm very proud of what we've accomplished. So
it's pretty cool how sometimes when you don't see something going a certain way, and then you kind of dive in, and it kind of changes your environment completely.
Yes.
And now when you had moved here from Chicago, did having that connection to the Junior League and having them here, did that kind of comfort you a little bit, make it easier to transition, or did you still feel that kind of homesick feeling from living there your whole life? Very
hard for me to leave because I left my 2 sisters. My husband left his 2 brothers and his parents. I actually was raised in northeastern Ohio. My father transferred us there when I was 5, and my parents both still live in Hudson, Ohio, and I've got 4 siblings. So we were all raised there, and I find that Hudson is equidistant between here and Chicago, so there's a lot of crossroads. My sisters and I meet in Hudson, which is pretty perfect. Hudson is a very historic town, and I've come to appreciate it very much now that I'm working here. I learned so many things about preserving historic buildings, appreciating the history of a community, and understanding how influential our librarian was, our town historian was, the fact that I grew up in a very historic house, and that my parents lovingly cared for and were respectful of, and we grew up in the historic downtown. And that was part of the Connecticut Reserve, the northeastern Ohio. So I've come to also learn about that it was part of the Underground Railroad, that town, and Frederick Douglass came to speak at what was Western Reserve University or Western Reserve College, which is now a prep school, and the college moved into Cleveland. But, it's it's a very interesting place,
Absolutely.
and so that's been exciting for me as an adult to look back and see how many influences there were. John Brown came from Hudson, Ohio, and so yeah, there was a lot going on.
That's pretty crazy. How much was going on?
Yes, there was a lot going for what seemed like a very quiet white picket fence little town.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of different ideas going on, and I discovered this year that one of my father's relatives had a house in Akron that was on the Underground Railroad. It was a station, which might have gone either way. You know, I didn't know exactly what his relative's role might have been in the whole story. And my brother and I can't tell you how thrilled we were, and we're going to go. The house probably doesn't exist, but we're going to go and explore that. And I mean, couldn't have been more overjoyed to discover that. So that's all exciting.
That is awesome. That is very exciting. Yeah. Absolutely. Alrighty, and now kind of to come back to the 9/11 aspect.
Yes, sorry.
No, absolutely. That was me leading that way.
Who's ever transcribing this can take out pages and pages of this, because I do tend to go down lots of rabbit holes.
The personal story makes so much more interesting, you know, for the rest of the interview now too. Absolutely. Okay. So, can you tell me about what inspired you to come up with the concept for the Monmouth County 9/11 and its aftermath commemoration, and why is it so important to you in Monmouth County?
Well, I certainly understood it to have a great impact on this county, and I think that, again, being maybe an outsider in some sense, coming here in 1998, and still being relatively new and feeling my way around, I viewed this area, you know, maybe through a different lens, but I certainly understood the impact, and I knew that some time would have to pass before we could really examine that incident and talk about it. So historically, and so. Of course, I didn't have any idea that I'd be in a position to play that role. But when I became president, I started having some thoughts about that. And then I worked with Melissa Ziobro. It was during my first year as president that she came and was the guest curator on our Superstorm Sandy exhibit. And that was literally within days of that. Well, actually, the first day that opened, we had a freeholder come, Lillian Burry, to the opening, and I was able to, at the opening, talk to her a little bit about other important exhibits that I felt that we should do. And she concurred on the 9/11 exhibit that we simply must do something to gather materials and do that. So it's something that Melissa and I think discussed a little bit and had kind of in the back of our heads. I don't remember exactly when we might have had that conversation, but it certainly had been floating around.
Gotcha. All right, so now to the actual day of September 11th, 2001. Do you recall what your plans for that day were supposed to be? Was it just a regular day, or did any specific details stick out to you?
It was supposed to be a regular day. I actually pulled out my calendar to kind of remember, where it fit into the scheme of things. My husband and I have 4 children, and at the time we had a, first grader, 5th grader, 7th grader, and sophomore in high school, all in Rumson. So that is one big campus with the 3 schools, primary, elementary, and high school are more or less on one campus. So I, a day like any other, had gotten them all to school and had come home and was doing the breakfast dishes, and I was always pretty cautious about having the news on in the morning. I had, when we first moved here, subscribed to the Asbury Park Press, and a couple of issues had landed on the kitchen table with what I thought were horrific headlines, and I immediately decided we're not going to do that. And I just didn't think that was a good way to start the day with that kind of news that seemed sort of sensational to me. And I do remember that our eldest was in 7th grade, and we went to the open house, and his history teacher said, you know, about our newspaper project now, I will make some newspapers available in the classroom, because if you can believe it, there's actually a student in one of my classes whose family doesn't subscribe to a daily paper. And of course that was our family. But so that's the kind of mother that I was, that it would be better to watch PBS in the morning, you know, something that we all could just enjoy and not worry about the cares of the world. But then I would come home and turn on the Today Show and get my news. Or so I did see the plane, you know, as soon as Matt Lauer turned over to the news, I saw that all unfold. And my husband was supposed to have been in Europe going to a meeting in Paris, and for some reason they postponed that meeting, or he would have been there, and that would have really been complicated. Mm-hmm. He had taken a job with a local company who brought him out here to manage their business, and after we made this huge move, he discovered that they brought him here to put him into place to manage the business so that they could then put the business on the market, and they'd have a really good manager in place. I'm simplifying the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But when they were purchased by a French company, then the French company brought him into the fold, and then they said, you know, we're actually going to be purchasing these kinds of companies around the country, and we'd like you to go around and help us to make these purchases around the country of small family-owned businesses, and help us to make these transitions with them. And so you're now part of the French team, and you're also going to be traveling all over the country. And suddenly my husband was going to be traveling all the time. And actually he came home a year into us having finally settled our 4 children into Rumson, New Jersey. I never wanted to move to New Jersey. My husband's a Canadian. I told him, nobody wants to move to New Jersey, you just don't understand. And he said, I don't know, it's really pretty. Have you ever been there? No, I've never been there. Well, it's pretty, you should come out and see it. And sure enough, it was very beautiful. They don't call it the Garden State for nothing. So I was, you know, very reluctantly coming to support my husband, of course, and had really finally survived that first year when he came home and said, I'm going to be traveling all the time. If you want, we can go back to Chicago. But it was a week into the school year, and I said, well, not now. Right. If you'd come 2 weeks ago, maybe, but not now. So here we were now. Now it was the second year, third year, whatever, in the fall again. And just, you know, a mother's job is to make everybody happy. You're only as happy as your saddest kid. And, you know, we'd made this big adjustment, and the beginning of the school year is always tense. But the kids were pretty concerned about his travel at any rate. And this was a new thing, that he was gone, you know, pretty much during the week, only home on weekends. Suddenly he wasn't able to coach any of their teams. It was a different kind of family situation that we had. But long way to tell you that fortunately he was home, and we had a quick conversation. What do you want to do about the children? And we decided, let's keep them in school right now. Let's just keep them there. That seems like the safest option right now. I'm on my way home from the office, which was in Tinton Falls. So he came home. Now, when we came out to look at houses, you know, I could just remember on the tours that they did make a rather big deal about, you know, this being just an incredible county. And here's Fort Monmouth, and look at how much land Fort Monmouth takes up. And this is the headquarters of communications for all of the military in the country. And, you know, here's Earl. I just remember that we were seeing a lot of military bases, and here's the, you know, weapons base, and that just really stuck with me. And then, of course, the proximity to New York City. And we had joined Beacon Hill Country Club, and my goodness, we could see Manhattan from Beacon Hill. And so just knowing that we were in kind of this prime East Coast location, and I just remember thinking, if this is going to go on all day, and these people are all smart, are we sitting right here in a place that is very vulnerable?
Mm-hmm.
And that is how my brain was going.
Right.
And by the time Jay got home to me, I was, you know, I just wonder if we're sitting targets here. Mm-hmm. And, you know, of course, by then the second plane, and then, you know, the plane that was turning around and coming east. And I just didn't know, you know, should we pack up the car and take these kids and start driving west and just go back to the Midwest? You know, this was just a very, I just remember thinking, we're in territory that we don't understand here on the East Coast, and I think we're around some pretty dangerous stuff, and depending upon how smart these people are, whoever they are, I think we're in a vulnerable geographic situation. So that kind of went on for a little bit, and he was calming me down. And I'm a pretty calm person, but it seemed like we should just stay put and keep the kids in school, and he was very calm about it. And anyway, then there was some call, maybe Giuliani, about, you know, there would be a need for blood, something, and I said, that's something I could do. So hopped in my car, went over, couldn't get anywhere near the blood bank. I was at least a mile away on Shrewsbury Avenue, and or Sycamore. And the police were saying, you know, thank you so much, but, you know, there's just no way that you're going to be able to get in, too many people. So I turned around, and, you know, you just feel kind of helpless. But I had to gear up for the fact that I was going to be picking up my children, and I needed to be in the right frame of mind. I didn't know how much they would know. I didn't know how much to tell them. I didn't know how to tell them in an age-appropriate way for this range of ages, you know, from first grade to sophomore in high school. And so they came home with tales of all of these children were leaving school. A neighbor had come, picked up his daughter who lived a couple of doors away, and ran through the hallway with her, picked her up and was running through the hallway. You know, why did Elizabeth leave the school? Why did her father pick her up and run? What was happening? And by the end of the day, there were, you know, there were only 10 kids left in my class. By the end of the day, my teacher started crying. What was going on? You know, what are the World Trade Towers? So we hadn't done enough of New York. I had never been to the top of the towers. We'd, oddly enough, thought about going there the week before, Jay and I, because we went in to meet some people for drinks, and they were going to be late, so we thought about going because we were in the neighborhood, but we didn't, which would have been really, really odd and interesting. So my kids had never been either, and so they didn't really even know what it all meant.
Now, when you had seen that first plane hit, did you kind of get a weird feeling right off the bat, or did you think it was kind of just like an accident?
I thought it was an accident.
You thought it was an accident at first? Okay. That seems to be the case too.
Yeah.
Now,
I thought it was like a little plane that, somehow, how could that be? But
right,
an
absolutely.
accident.
Mm-hmm. And most people wouldn't, their mind wouldn't go directly to that, I suppose, too. And now seeing that on the TV, do you recall any specific images? Or is it really just that kind of the plane?
Obviously, just as everybody remembers, just the most beautiful day. Beautiful day. So it seemed inconceivable that somebody could have gotten off track. So did somebody have a heart attack in this little airplane and lose control? Did the airplane, just, I don't know, have a malfunction and blow up? It just couldn't wait to hear the details on this tragedy of this little plane somehow losing its way and hitting this building and the poor person.
Mm-hmm. Now, so you already, I was going to ask if you or any loved ones had any association, but yeah, already know that one. Now, in terms of the community coming together, what do you recall the general feeling of Monmouth County being like in the first days after September 11th?
Well, in the first days, so my children ended up knowing several of the children. They were classmates and friends who were waiting to hear about their fathers or an uncle. And so it was very tense, and we were waiting and waiting for news. And so it was a very hard thing. My children all went to school the next day. There weren't very many children in school.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to give your children some self-confidence and comfort about the situation when there are so many unknowns, and reassure them that everything's going to be okay when the odds were at that point that they weren't, because now we're 24 hours later, and at least these three people that we were connected to through our kids had not returned to pick up their cars.
Wow.
And trying to help them to be appropriate with these three friends and put aside their own feelings and not make it about them in front of these friends. This was very tricky as a parent, teaching your child to be empathetic without getting caught up in their own fears. And it's very hard because they became very anxious about their own father. And you could no longer say, he's going to be okay, nothing's ever going to happen. So innocence was lost. And you had to also at the same time say, your friend needs this from you right now, when I wasn't really even sure what their friend needed from them. And then of course when the assumption was made that these three, two fathers and an uncle had been lost and were not returning, how to help their friends get through that when you had your own fears and concerns and stuff. The town, of course, came together, and there were, vigils and things that happened in the parks. And the interesting thing for me was trying to figure out that this was not a local incident. That the country was grieving, that there were people in the World Trade Tower who came from other places other than, this wasn't just local people going to work on Wall Street. And then it made me realize that New York was a very different city. It wasn't like working in Chicago. That this was full of people who, came to New York for meetings from all over the world, and it was just New York as a city unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really I remember being sort of surprised, like, why are they grieving in San Francisco, and why are they, you know, it
Absolutely.
really took a while for me to figure out the international scope of this, which I, you know, later was kind of embarrassed about, because I really thought of it as this, you know, maybe tri-state area thing.
Right.
So it was an enormous thing.
And especially being from, you know, not in this area too, and just coming here 3 years before,
Right.
it's probably
And
difficult to
Chicago
grasp
being,
that.
you know, a big, huge city, but being
It's, like you said,
more a
different,
city,
absolutely.
you know, just unto itself. New York is just so
One of a
much,
kind.
so different from that. So that was something that I remember thinking, this is really, everybody's part of this.
Absolutely.
Not to mention Shanksville and Washington DC, and, you know, that who truly had lost people.
Absolutely. And now, especially with you kind of piggybacking off you being an outsider, were you able to kind of have that feeling of community in those first few weeks after, or did you feel like you were a little bit left out in that situation just because of lack of knowing people?
No, I felt like right away the junior league, we were scheduled to have a meeting that evening, and we had a junior leaguer waiting to hear about not only her husband but her sister. And right away the junior league kicked into gear. I'm very proud of the league, and recognized that we needed to be there for not only our members but other, you know, widows inevitably in the community who would need a helping hand with meals and, you know, childcare, a place where they could go and privately be together. And then we organized kind of a retreat for later on in the fall, or maybe early in January, where they could have a weekend of more than pampering too, because we brought in mindfulness exercises and yoga and, you know, all sorts of things, but where they could go and be with other people who were experiencing what they were experiencing. And so we sort of proactively got kicked into gear and did what the junior league does, and I was really proud to be a league member at that time. So that was one community. I've always considered my family, you know, to be just a small community, and we certainly were, having moved here. And so we were there for one another, and that was, always gives me strength. But I could also see that they were all suffering, and I would say that my children suffered for many, many, many years, and I can attribute much of that to 9/11, truthfully. A lot of anxiety came out of that I can trace directly back to 9/11.
Absolutely, especially with their ages too, because that's very, like you said, between having the age difference, but they were all old enough to kind of understand relatively what was going on.
Yeah.
More so in the first grader.
So,
And absolutely
yeah.
had to make it tough. And now, sorry, I'm kind of jumping backwards. Now, when you said that you had to kind of figure out how to tell each one of them what had happened, how did you go about that? Did you kind of like separate them, or did you try and talk to them collectively?
You know, you always start with what do you know about what happened today, or you
Right.
know, how did you feel when your teacher cried? Why do you think he was crying? And what, you know, you kind of have to start with where are they? And do you have any questions about, you know? And then you kind of have to do it with each of them at a different, and you can never assume that the oldest one is going to be the easiest, or that, you know. So in preparing for this, I had pulled out my calendars and was just kind of trying to, and I said some casual thing about this that triggered something in my daughter, and I realized, you know, there are some triggers there still. And you can never assume that anybody's healed, or that just because, I'm used to, because I'm sorry,
It's okay.
I've worked on this for a while. They're not on this journey with me. They didn't go through the project. They didn't come to see the exhibit. And so, something that you get used to, they're not where you are on the continuum. And so some of these things, they still can't face. And I sometimes I forget that, and I'll jump into something kind of casually, and even a fact about something. And anyway, my one daughter was just so taken aback when I said something, a fact that she didn't know about that would have had an impact on one of the victims. And she just, immediately she got the way I just got, very tearful. And I realized, you can't make any assumptions about what they know or what they're feeling or where they are. It still can be very, very much on the surface, or very deep in them that they still don't want to touch. Mm-hmm. We found that here, I'm sure Melissa would tell you that too. Some people are just not ready to talk about their experience, and never will be. Mm-hmm. For others, the 20-year mark was just about the right time for them to come forward. So this is from a person who didn't lose anybody, but saw kids who still struggled with it, and who.
It's crazy, just the impact, like you said right there, where you didn't necessarily have any direct people there, but you feel from the community around you, the people you know, that you are almost just as impacted as they were too.
I can't tell you how many times Melissa and I were calling one another, crying throughout the course of the last 8 months, because you could see other people were affected, or somebody would do something. I don't know, you probably have something coming up about the exhibit itself, but there were so many touching moments with people involved in the putting together of this exhibit that were so moving to me. I can't tell you how many people either were personally touched by the incident, or just wanted to do something, just because everybody wants to feel that they are making a difference and doing something to help those who were impacted by it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if this is the time to talk about it, but my remarks on the opening night were I should really be a general contractor, because I've never undertaken so many projects around this property, getting it ready for 9/11, where, I've never done anything like that, but every tradesperson that I called responded in a positive way, even though they were extremely busy with whatever they were doing. And that's how they'd start out. Well, I can't do it. Are you kidding? I've got stuff, I can't come for 3 months. Mm-hmm. And then I'd say, oh, okay, well, because we're putting together an exhibit for 9/11, and we're, and within about 3 minutes, they were like, okay, all right, I'll be there tomorrow. And, people were just so generous with their time and changing their schedules and coming. And you'd find out that, sure enough, in the case of, I won't go into details, but one guy who was working here, it turned out that he had lost his brother. He found his brother's photo up there. He hadn't said that at the outset, but he had changed his whole schedule around to be here. Other people just, they knew of somebody, or they just wanted to come and do something because they wanted to be helpful over this. Down to the last day when we were trying to get the piece of steel out and back to the museum. We had borrowed it from the museum in Trenton, and it weighed so much that it took 3 policemen to carry it up the stairs. We I finally hired a professional moving company, and I hadn't explained completely thoroughly what this was about. So they pulled the truck up out back, and as we were walking along the path, I said, you know, this is what it's about. We've had this exhibit. We came around the corner, and there's this field of flags, and I could tell that the main guy was getting a little, this is what this is about? I wasn't sure what this was. We came in the front door, and I'm kind of explaining as we're walking up the staircase to the exhibit. And he was getting kind of less and less comfortable. And I said, you know, it's been a really wonderful moving exhibit for people, and I'm happy to show you around. And he was, you know, just trying to hold himself together. Mm-hmm. And his colleague said, do you want to take a minute? And he said, no, I just have a rock in my shoe. And he sat down and was kind of pulling himself together. Anyway, they carried the thing down, very heavy, put it on the front porch. He sent his colleague back to the truck to get a dolly. And then he turned to me and he said, you don't know how many widows I moved out of their houses in Jersey City, whose husbands never came home. Mm-hmm. And they waited and waited, and finally, you know, they never came home, and they had to move. They couldn't afford to stay there. And he said, this is just all, he said, I haven't thought about this for a long time. Mm-hmm. And this is all coming back to me. And he just, you know, kind of started pouring out stories about it. And I said, you know, this is just really so kind of you to share your story, and if you want to talk about it any further, you know, here's our card, you know, please give us a call. And by the time he left, he was saying, thank you so much for what you do, and he's yelling out the window, I'm going to be calling you. And you know, he could smile as he drove off, but mm-hmm. the person that you least suspect, who's got this big story, and I could just tell he felt so much better having shared something. There was a lightness in him as he left. Mm-hmm. And that was like the last of the people. Anyway, I got an email about 2 hours later from the moving company. There will be no charge for picking up your item in Middletown and taking it to Trenton. Wow. Thank you, from the CFO of the moving company. So clearly, you know, this guy went back and called the company, and, you know, I mean, it was just like stuff like that mm-hmm. was happening left and right.
Wow. And that's good. Then even this much farther down the line too, you still kind of have that feeling of community where people are helping one another out.
Absolutely.
You know, have that connection still with it.
If there was any positive that came out of this horrific thing, mm-hmm. it was that sense of community, and it still exists. Okay. So that was, as I say, there was something uplifting about many uplifting things that we uncovered here. And we tried to highlight them, that, you know, from the first responders to the charities that grew out of this. We tried to shine the light on that, to just average humans, you know, putting together lemonade stands in order to raise funds for whatever, to people shoveling the sidewalks of, you know, the widows who couldn't do that. To John Stewart. I mean, there are so many people in our county who are big name people who mm-hmm. did significant things, but then there were also little people who did things. But, you know, John Stewart's still working to this day to help first responders who are suffering. So we just happen to have some pretty incredible people in this county. And Ginny Bauer, who went and was an advocate for the widows getting tax relief, and she's from Monmouth County. She's a widow herself. She now serves on the board of the 9/11 Museum. Yeah, it was really, I felt important to not only honor the 147 souls, but also all of the others that made a contribution, from the ferry operators to, you know, the Fort Monmouth and all of the equipment that they had. And this is where it was so great to partner with Melissa, because, you know, that's her world. She's so great about knowing that kind of thing. I might have uncovered some charities and that end of things, but she had all the military side, and she's wonderful about that. So we're good partners.
And now, I know with a lot of people coming here, I'm sure it was probably mixed emotions between sadness, some kind of therapeutic feelings and things like that. Have you found with the oral histories and things that you have seen for the interviewees, has it seemed to be therapeutic for them as well, or does it tend to kind of go back and forth?
I think it was very, very therapeutic. I think a lot of them have, several of them have been working enough doing what they've been doing, which has been therapeutic in itself, that they were comfortable talking about it. I think we found some people who haven't been tapped to talk about it and reminisce, and I think it was high time that they were, and I think they were digging deep to find the memories, because there are very few documents left from 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
So the timing of this was exquisite, because soon there won't be anything. And we need their memories to be pulled out and put into oral histories. So this is a fantastic project. In the case of one person, she's made it her life's work for the last 20 years to talk about it at great length, and to help others. And she actually felt that this would be a good bookend for herself, and claimed that this would be the last time she would speak about it, after really giving it a great deal of consideration and talking to many people over the years, and helping people through all kinds of therapeutic things. And she wrote a book about the experience and all of this. And so it was somewhat interesting that she thought this was sort of the end cap for her to speak about it one more time before she kind of ended this chapter and moved on. I don't know whether that's truly going to happen, but that's how she viewed this. It's 20 years. This is a good way to maybe close a chapter on this and really move forward.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to switch gears again a little bit now, more towards kind of governmental a little bit. So now, do you recall how you felt about the balance of freedom and national security in the aftermath of 9/11? And if you want me to break these up at all, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I am an obedient person, and I am respectful of government rules. I mean, I think the government's there to help us in ways that we need to be helped, and I felt that it was appropriate. The things that we've been asked to do are minor inconveniences. There are times that I think, are we focusing on these picayune details like shoes and belts, you know, and I'm praying that we're getting the big picture, and if there's anything, I worry about that maybe we're caught up in all these little tiny things. And I hope they're not missing the big picture. But no, I had no objection to anything that they were asking the public to do.
Now, if you were to define, like, your idea of what the big picture would be of what the kind of safety of the United States would be, would you be able to define that? Or?
I mean, you know, I really hope that the CIA and the FBI and everybody is doing their work, and that those networks are all as operational as I would hope that they would be. But I'm as concerned as the next person. Certainly in the last couple of years, hoping that is all working the way one thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's, I don't know what else I could say about that, except that I am a person of faith in our American government.
Absolutely, you believe, put it in their hands, and
Yeah.
they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I come out of a world of believing in diplomacy. I worked for many years with nonprofits who work bringing people to, I'm a Fulbright scholar, so I studied abroad with the thought that, bringing students of different cultures together is the way, that we will come to understand one another. And then I worked for 8 years in Chicago, greeting guests from 100 different countries who came to Chicago and putting them in touch with their counterparts, in the hope that if people have common ground through their professions and meet one another and establish networks around the world, that this is the way that we can all come to get to know one another and have better understanding, and hopefully, I guess, that it trickles up to the leadership of these countries, and down. And I remain hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Did you notice an increased level of patriotism in the direct area and then kind of in the overall United States from what you were able to see on the media and such?
I think so, yes. One of the things that I saw was my daughter wanted to go as a flag that Halloween. So she did, my youngest. Yes, I think we all felt a lot of patriotism, and it did bring the country together.
And just in a simple kind of definition, what would you define as patriotism?
I think, love of country, and that we, no matter that we might have differences ideologically, and, we don't have to agree on everything, but if there was a third party questioning us and we were two Americans, we would defend America in front of someone. We're like family.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the way I phrase my children, that, we don't speak ill of our family
Mm-hmm.
to others. We have one another's backs. And to me, that's being very loyal and patriotic. And so it's a united front against the world, I guess, and believing in the spirit of the founding fathers and their hopes and dreams for the country, and the promise of what this country could be, and knowing that we're still, working hard to get there.
Mm-hmm. I would say that was a beautiful definition of patriotism. And now, being that almost all current students were born after September 11th, 2001, how important do you believe it is for them to see these oral histories and understand what truly happened on that day?
I think it's pretty important.
Mm-hmm.
I think the world changed dramatically that day. As I've said, I think the innocence was lost, sadly. I don't think we'll ever be the same. And, it was an attack on our soil, and we were caught unawares, and it was just so, it was really just, it was right under our noses, and that's just very, very disturbing that somebody could have done something that horrific right there while we just, were asleep at the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And never dreaming that somebody could ever do something like that.
Absolutely. Now, do you think that 9/11 will always be remembered as such an important event as it is today? Or do you think it'll begin to fade, similar to like Pearl Harbor, how we celebrate it, where you have the commemoration of it, but it's not as kind of hitting home as
I think it's
it
inevitable
used to
that it will fade because we cannot keep up with the pace of all of the happenings in the world. I think that there's, just so much media coverage of so many things that I don't blame the younger generation for trying. How can they possibly sort through everything and try to make sense of what's important and what isn't? The media isn't helpful in that regard. And, history museums will do their best to try to highlight historic things that are important. On the other hand, we try to collect a whole range of things, everyday things that are important too. I'm a big scrapbooker, and I always tell people, don't forget to take pictures beyond, Christmas, Easter, and Halloween. Take a picture of what your kid took in their lunch to school, because that's what they might find interesting in 50 years. What did my lunchbox look like? How many pairs of gym shoes did I have, and what did they look like? I mean, get in your kid's bed and take a picture of their room. Don't just have it be, here we were, this was Christmas of this year, and this was Christmas of that year, and this was... So, I'm just talking now as everyday things are important too, but I do think there were some major lessons that we learned through 9/11, and in both, the horrific incident, but also, as I say, in the many good things that came out of it. And I really love the documentary that we put together, because to see the people who volunteered, the first responders had to be held back.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't wait to get to the site, to ground zero. And so you see there people on this end just saying, we can't send all of you to New York. We also need to keep some of you here in case there are incidents, everyday incidents here.
Mm-hmm.
There might be fires in Monmouth County. We might need policemen here, but just people springing into action, it just makes one feel good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Good.
All right, I think that is going to bring us to the end of this. Is there anything else you would like to talk about or add that we have not covered?
No, I think, I know that I talk too much, and I'm sorry for whoever transcribes it, and this they won't be able to see, but I thought this was interesting that I do keep our holiday cards every year in this book. And when I went to see, well, what did I write about 9/11? And yeah, I did write in here that, first of all, this was the picture that I happened to take a month before my husband took it, of our 4 kids who were looking very serious.
Uh-huh.
So I just threw that in. It was a patriotic one, and it said, I think this photo is representing the end of innocence for my children and their generation. This photo was taken at the first of what would grow to be an annual family reunion. Anyway, I just, Jay captured this wonderful picture of a somewhat somber but loving group of siblings. Little did we imagine that less than 1 month later, the attack of 9/11 would occur. As the holidays approached, it was clear that we were not in the frame of mind to be lighthearted. This card seemed to capture our moods perfectly. So that's the frame of mind that we were in. And we usually did try to send, sort of a, I don't know, lighthearted something.
Right.
Whether, kids popping up a champagne bottle or, but
something to lighten the mood.
something to lighten the mood.
Uh-huh.
And that year,
Wasn't.
it wasn't. And so that was sort of an interesting.
Absolutely, where it's like sometimes you don't fully think into things, but
Yeah.
everything kind of has that
Yeah.
meaning there underlying.
Right, so anyway, that's where my head was, that holiday season, and, I think everyone else was sort of in that same frame, and yet you had to carry on.
Mm-hmm.
You have to carry on,
Absolutely.
when you have children in particular.
Especially you have to really hold
You
it together
really do have to
because
hold it
you're
together.
not only dealing with yourself, but you have them to be responsible for too. So
It's a whole different thing when you're a parent.
very true.
I hope you have the opportunity to have that experience. It's wonderful, but it's one of the most difficult jobs that
Mhm.
you'll ever have. And as I witnessed again this morning, it never ends. Your kids can turn 30 and you're still going to say something and they're going to start crying and you're going to realize, oh my God, I didn't think that one through.
Mhm. And that's the thing with grief and trauma too, where it's so multi-layered, where even if you could be okay for, a few years afterwards, you could be down the line where something triggers you
Exactly.
and it brings it all back. So it's like there's
Exactly.
no definite timeline on when you should feel better. It's
No,
just kind of
no,
to
exactly.
each their own in that sense for sure.
Exactly, yeah. So,
Well, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and participating in this interview. I'm sure you already know how important these interviews are.
I do, and I appreciate you doing it. Thank you.